Everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We got a great live Q&A for you today. If you've got questions about nutrition you'd like me to answer, go ahead and start typing those into the chat feed to the side or underneath the video. And if you missed our interview earlier this week on Tuesday with Sally Norton on toxic superfoods and oxalate toxicity, I highly encourage you to go back and watch that replay. We can put a link up for you. You can go and check that out. And then also, if you want to dive even deeper into oxalates, don't forget we also have a crash course on the topic that you can also check out. We'll put a link up to that video underneath for you to check out later. So we're going to try to keep our questions to oxalates. Now, I want to start this conversation off with many of you were very confused, or at least not maybe confused, but frustrated. Especially those of you trying to follow a gluten-free diet and you're discovering some of the gluten-free foods are actually high in oxalates. And so there's this, I perceive this kind of overwhelm for a lot of you. It's like, I've just changed my diet. Now I need to change it more. And so I want to preface this conversation by saying, look, oxalates can be a problem for many. I'm not saying that everyone needs to completely try to avoid oxalate with 100% degree certainty in their diet. What I'm trying to teach and to share with you is that many of you have gone gluten-free, you felt better, did better, and maybe you're still struggling. I'm trying to introduce you to the concept that this may be a reason why that can happen. It's not necessary that everyone perceives from that interview that everyone needs to be on a low oxalate diet tomorrow in order to be healthy. Remember, there are a lot of variable factors in oxalates, and one of those factors is quantitatively how much you're eating. But you can also get oxalate if you're in mold. You can also get more oxalate if you have yeast overgrowth in your intestines. And you can also have an increased risk of oxalate toxicity if you've got a long history of antibiotic use, because antibiotics can knock out the bacteria that in your GI tract that help you to metabolize oxalates as you eat them. So there's a lot of variable awareness that needs to be understood in this. And again, don't walk away with the fear in your mind that just because you're gluten-free, you also need to be spinach-free and almond-free, etc. So again, calm heads prevail here. I'm trying to give you other options and strategies if your gluten-free diet is not working as well as you had hoped it would be working. And so looking at oxalates may be kind of a phase 2 to the part of your answer as well. So take this information in that context, please, and don't get overwhelmed by it. Okay, let's go through your questions. How much spinach is too much, and does cooking change the rules? No, Grace. Cooking spinach does not reduce necessarily the oxalate content in the spinach. And as far as how much is too much, it's not a how much is too much in terms of spinach. I think ultimately the best thing that you can do if you're trying to stay on a low oxalate diet is keep your oxalate levels under a couple of hundred milligrams a day. So then from that, apply quantitatively how much spinach you can eat based on staying under a particular number of oxalate, and then also looking at your other foods. So one of the best ways to go about doing that, Grace, is to get and you can get this from Sally Norton. She's probably got one of the best charts on this topic, which is the oxalate content of different foods. Those charts are in her book, Toxic Superfoods, and you can check it out in her book. She may also have some of those charts on her website as well, and you can go and check those out if you're looking for actual numbers to stay under. What about teeth breaking apart? Is this related to excess oxalates? In my experience, Melissa, no. That's not to say theoretically there couldn't be an association, but if your teeth are crumbling or falling apart, in my experience, where we generally will see that happening in people is with severe malnutrition. And there are a lot of reasons people develop severe malnutrition. As a matter of fact, there's 3 fundamental reasons why we'll see malnutrition in individuals. One is you're just not eating enough. of certain nutrients in the diet that you currently have. And sometimes it's just that a person is not eating enough total calories, especially protein calories as it relates to teeth. Number two would be that you have an underlying problem in your GI tract or in the organs that help your GI tract help you digest, right? So your gut could be inflamed. You might have a liver or gallbladder problem or a pancreatic insufficiency problem. Any of those things could lead to malabsorption of the nutrients from your diet. So those can definitely contribute to, again, decay of the teeth or crumbling of the teeth. And then the third reason would be there's an underlying inflammatory condition that you have where you're burning through more nutrients than what your diet is currently providing in an effort to try to deal with the inflammation of the illness that you have. So those are three of the biggest reasons. Now, so again, it's my experience. If you really want to check why your teeth are deteriorating, and you're eating well, again, you're not eating sugar, you're not eating processed food that, these things are known to increase erosion of tooth enamel, and these things are known to increase dental caries and dental decay and periodontitis or inflammation of the gum line. If you're eating well and not in an endeavor to make those other things happen, then you really got to consider malnutrition as the potential. I recommend people get tested for this on a regular basis in my practice. So, getting a good vitamin and mineral nutritional deficiency test. We offer something called an INA, I-N-A, intracellular nutritional analysis of 55 nutrients. And you might check that out. I'll put a link up for you, and you can learn more about that type of testing. But it's certainly worth looking at if your teeth are decaying at a rapid pace. So some questions in the feed about oxalate dumping. Oxalate dumping can definitely occur, and it can come with a variety of different types of symptoms or affect. Probably one of the more common symptoms of oxalate dumping that I have seen is loose bowels or diarrhea. Super common. So if you're kind of going through an oxalate reduction in your diet, and then you start having, unexplainable loose bowels, that certainly can be one of the symptoms as your body starts to try to dump them out of you. So a lot of questions about the fear of oxalate. As again, go back to the original context I gave as we started today's show. There's something else that you can consider, and it's not 100% accurate, but insurance will cover it and your doctor can order it. And so it's worthwhile doing, in my opinion. We actually run this on everyone who comes into the practice. We run this type of test on everyone, and it is a 24-hour oxalate excretion test. And so it's a year. You can our peers quantitatively how much oxalate is coming out of you over that time frame. And for ladies, if your levels really are pushing over 30, you've definitely got an oxalate issue, an oxalate overburden. Guys, the reference range is a little bit different. The reference range is about 45. So if you're running over 45 in that regard, that's considered high. I look at it as a threshold or a cutoff of anything over 30. I'm going to start being concerned about whether or not a person is over consuming oxalate. So if you're kind of freaking out about this oxalate stuff and wondering whether or not it may or may not be a right move for you, go ask your doctor to perform a 24-hour urinary oxalate measurement on you. Again, it's not a perfect test, but it's an objective means. And if it does come back positive, it can give you some really solid answers as to where to take your diet. And then those of you that have repetitive kidney stones that are calcium oxalate, you already need to be looking at this much more aggressively. Let's see here. I like this. Some of this commentary is just testimonial, right? So Mary says, as soon as I switched to a low oxalate diet and changed my thyroid med to non-synthetic, bam, new life. Love it. no more kidney stones, and no more rashes. So in Mary's situation, going oxalate, low oxalate, and changing her medicine from a non-synthetic was really, really life altering. It's a question about why do you seem so the question is, why do you seem to crave all these high oxalate foods like coffee, cacao nibs, sweet potatoes, spinach, seeds, and nuts? Near impossible for me to imagine my diet without these. Well, there's a number of reasons why people would crave coffee and chocolate, and that's because they're addicted to caffeine. And caffeine addiction is going to have an influence on what you're eating. Again, go back to the context that I gave before the show. We got anything else in the middle there?
No, that's it.
Okay. Let's see here. Andre, on the topic of genetic methylation testing in methylated vitamins and supplements, it's a hot topic. It's not really a hot topic. We've been talking about this for 20 years, genetic testing for methylation variations, what are called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. These are, these are genetic mutations, too strong of a word. These are genetic variances that increase the risk of a person developing problems when their methylation status is compromised or is slowed down as a result of genetic predispositions. I think a lot of people are out there pushing genetic testing to sell B vitamin supplements in the wrong context. I think if you have an MTHFR mutation or a COMT mutation or an MTRR mutation or an MTR mutation, etc., that's not the end of the world. I have many of these mutations, and I don't necessarily supplement with high-dose methylated B vitamins in order to maintain my health. That being said, some people do benefit from them, but you have to take it into context. Don't blame your genes for your poor health. And I think that's where it's a lot of times these genetic tests are taken out of context, is people get the result back and then, I have bad genes, therefore I need to do these other things. And that's just not the case. We actually did clinical study on this for 5 years. This was, almost 20 years ago. And we didn't find any tremendous clinical benefit in people with genetic mutations taking a ton of B vitamins that are methylated. Where we found the benefit for those individuals is when we asked them to change their diet and we asked them to change their lifestyle. And so the benefit was in the diet and lifestyle change more than it was in the supplementation. Let's see here. Are beans good for our gut? Which are the good ones and which are not? Are chia seeds okay for gluten-free diet? Chia seeds are gluten-free. Beans are gluten-free. Are beans good for the gut? Depends on the person and depends on whether you're allergic to them. It also depends on the status of your digestive tract. So for many people who have been struggling with chronic leaky gut, chronic gut inflammation, beans are a bad idea. Why? Because there are a lot of difficult to digest compounds in beans, the lectins, the phytates, the oxalates. On top of that, beans are very, very challenging already, even with a healthy gut, to digest in high quantities. That's why, the song exists, the childhood song, Beans, the musical fruit, right? The more you eat, you get the gist. So, if you're eating a lot of beans and you're struggling and you have a lot of gas and a lot of bloating and a lot of intestinal discomfort, listen to your body. That's your cue, and to eat less or to eat none in some cases. We generally, if you're following along in No Grain, No Pain, we remove beans and legumes in the phase 2 of the diet for this very reason, because many people initially going on the diet do have GI inflammation, do have digestive problems. And so beans can be extremely hard to digest for those individuals. and then they can put a kink in your healing path. So, it depends on the person. If you're going to eat beans, though, we do recommend that you prepare them in the traditional methods. So soak them, sprout them, cook them in high heat temperatures, like a pressure cooker, or slow cook them over a long period of time, because what that does is it breaks down a lot of the chemicals in the beans that can disrupt your digestion. So again, if you're going to eat them, cook them appropriately in the traditional methodologies. There's a woman by the name of Sally Fallon who has a fantastic book called Nourishing Traditions. You can check that out, and it talks about this very topic. And again, if you're going to use those beans. But if you're trying to follow no grain, no pain, phase 2, we do not recommend legumes, which includes the beans within the diet. Tomato and bell pepper, thumbs up or thumbs down is the question. Depends. Again, depends. If you ever notice in any of my videos, in any of my show, I try not to generalize for the masses, right? So you say, are tomatoes inherently a bad food? No, there's nutrition in tomatoes. Can tomatoes be problematic for many people? Absolutely, they can, for many different reasons. Part of the problem with tomatoes is the solenoids, which are compounds commonly found in nightshade-based foods. And so these things have been shown to contribute to joint pain and joint flare in people with rheumatological disease and rheumatoid arthritis, spondylosis, or spondyloarthropathies. And so in those cases, tomatoes are not a good thing, right? But there are certainly people that can tolerate tomatoes just fine. This is why I'm a big advocate of testing and not guessing, because you can guess your way around this whole thing, and you're going to get 55 opinions. You're going to get half the doctors over here saying tomatoes are fantastic. You're going to get another half over here saying they're completely toxic to everyone, no matter what. And I think they're all right, but they're also all wrong. We can't generalize those types of things as a whole. And so when you ask me a question like, are tomatoes good or bell peppers good? It goes back to, who are you? What is your digestive strength? What is your resiliency? What are you allergic to? What are you not allergic to? And how does your body react or respond to certain foods? Because there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for this. Does NAC help to clean out oxalates and oxalate buildup? I don't think there's any compelling research that says that's the case. We can theorize that, Kimmy, but I haven't seen any research studies that show that NAC is the way to push oxalate out. Does cooking alter or reduce oxalates? Is there a lab to determine oxalate buildup? I think I answered on the lab part. Now there's another lab, Angelia. You can have your doctor and your insurance cover a 24-hour oxalate test, but then you can also perform, this is not going to be covered by insurance, but you can ask for it if you have a good functional doctor. And there's a test called an OAT test, an organic acids test, and it measures things like oxalic acid and some other metabolites of oxalate that might indicate oxalate buildup, or whether even you have a genetic oxalate issue, because some people do have a elimination diet or reintroduction the only way to determine if it's an issue. No. So again, testing would be where I would always start. A lot of questions on what is high and what is not high in oxalates. So for Anna and some of these others asking the question, would you post a link to, we have a page, a breakdown on oxalates for you, and it lists which foods are high in oxalate and it lists which foods are low in oxalate. And so instead of me going through each question and saying this one's high, this one's low, etc., I'm going to put that link below the video for you guys, and you can tap into that as a resource. Is alpha lipoic acid good to lower enzymes in the liver? It can be. Alpha lipoic acid is very supportive of liver function. It's a very potent antioxidant that helps regenerate glutathione, which is the tripeptide that the liver uses to really clean house and detoxify. So alpha lipoic acid is super supportive in that way. It certainly won't hurt you to try it, and you can ask your doctor to monitor your liver enzymes while you take it. If you're looking at effectiveness with alpha lipoic acid, I'd recommend no less than about 800 milligrams a day if that's what you're trying to see if you can accomplish that. You can also check out our crash course on lipoic acid to get more detailed information. Let's see. Nicobolic says, what are the best supplements to help shortness of breath from long COVID? So it's not that okay, let's put that into context. So if you've had long COVID and you're still having a shortness of breath issue, one of the best things that I would say you can take to support your lung function and lung integrity and to support what's called mucolytic breakdown of mucus from the lungs is something called NAC, N-acetylcysteine. And you need upwards of 1,000 as a minimum starting point, 1,000 milligrams a day, and upwards of anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams a day. I would recommend it, starting low and working your way up high to see if that's helpful. But I'd always also suggest that if you're struggling with long COVID, a lot of the times the cases of people where I've seen them struggle with long COVID, a lot of them are in mold. And so they're actually being exposed to mold. And one of the reasons why they can't recover from COVID is because the mold is immunosuppressive, and the COVID knocked them on their butt and the mold kept them knocked down. And so you might also investigate whether or not you have a environmental mold issue going on as well. What food is not compatible with Hashimoto's? Lots of foods can be non-compatible with Hashimoto hypothyroidism, depending on the person. So it's not a one size fits all, but I would say a great place to start with Hashimoto's. There's about 350 studies now confirming the benefit of gluten-free diets on Hashimoto's antibodies. So we'll see people following gluten-free diets in the medical literature. We'll see their antibody levels start to drop, and we'll see their symptoms start to improve. So I'd say if you want to draw kind of a simple generalization about what food is not compatible with Hashimoto, I'd say start with gluten. But then I would say beyond that, you really need to get tested because one person's food is another person's poison. And any food, I've seen blueberries trigger problems, I've seen broccoli trigger problems, I've seen beef trigger problems in different people. So it's really unique to the person. Let's see, Carla says, 21-year-old college athlete with esophagus aching post-consumption of any fruit. So your esophagus hurts after eating fruit. Vegetable, bean, legume, nut, or seafood. So all those things. So your esophagus hurts after eating any of those things: vegetables, beans, legumes, nuts, seafood, or any fruit. We're concerned about the lack of nutrients, has been like this for 5 years. Then you're missing something, Carla. Something's missing terribly because you shouldn't see somebody suffering and needing to restrict a diet over that length of a period of time and still not getting better. Because generally, if the foods that are causing the reaction are allergies, unless somebody has what we call true allergies, like a true allergy, which would be, you're going into kind of an IgE histaminic response where your eyes and your nose is running and your throat is constricting and you're breaking out in hives. Like that would be a true allergy. But most people don't have true allergies in that sense. They have what are called acquired allergies. And so by eliminating certain things over a long enough period of time, you basically reduce the immune system's overreactivity over that time. And it doesn't take 5 years. You're missing something big. One of the things we commonly see in people with esophagitis like that is with the foods you're describing is they have a yeast infiltration into their esophagus. And so you could have like a candida overgrowth that is getting into the esophagus. And so when you put those carbohydrate heavier foods in, you can feed that yeast and you can create little mini flares. As far as the seafood and the that so much won't do that with yeast, but some people are allergic to seafood and do have problems with a number of different varieties of seafood. I would suggest that, again, if you've been struggling for 5 years, get testing done. Get testing for gluten sensitivity. Get testing for other food sensitivities and food allergies, but also get tested to see if there's a yeast problem, a candida or a yeast problem, or there are other kinds of bacteria that can do this as well. Bacteria like H. pylori can be triggered in the same way. So get those things measured. Get with your doctor to get those things measured so that you can get on the right track. I can give up spinach, rhubarb, beet greens, but how can I give up almonds, cashews, peanut butter, and potatoes and chocolate? You know, you may, like I said earlier, Mark, you may not need to give up all of those things. It may, you know, again, the context of this conversation is that everyone doesn't necessarily need to give up all foods that contain oxalates. The context of the conversation is that oxalate may be part of your problem, and it's worthwhile exploring, because if you do need to educate yourself on how to change your diet, even if it's just for a temporary time frame, then it's a smart move. So get tested before you assume you need to avoid every oxalate ever. Let's go down on the far left when you can too. Have battled an undiagnosed Lyme. Did your LRA and it says severe tilapia and casein, moderate beef, veal, and others. Did alpha gal before equals negative? How do I tell if Lyme or DNA? So the question, so if you don't, you think you're battling undiagnosed Lyme, but you don't know that for certain. And, you know, so the question is, how do you know if it's Lyme? I don't know what you mean by or DNA. If you have Lyme, you can get tested for Lyme. There's a lot of really great tests that can be used to help you ascertain whether or not you have Lyme. I'd get with a good functional doctor who understands Lyme and works with a lot of Lyme cases in order to, you know, to go about doing the proper kinds of testing, because the classic traditional Western blot can be very misleading and you can get false negatives. So get the right tests. Not sure about the rest of the aspect of your question as far as DNA is concerned. Maybe you could elaborate for me. I've noticed much better response to arugula versus kale. Kale, depending on the kind of kale, kale can be very high oxalate. And that may be why you're seeing, you know, better response. You may also just do better with arugula. Some people don't do well on kale. I'm one of them. I don't eat kale at all. Thoughts on pectisol as modified citrus pectin as a safe chelating agent? It's fair. I wouldn't put it in the category of the best chelators, but I would say, you know, it's decent, and it can be a part of an overarching chelation process. But I would also look to use NAC and garlic and chlorella and EDTA potentially, depending on what kind of metal that you have, among some other things. Alpha lipoic acid is a great chelator as well. Vitamin C is a great chelator. So if it's part of a comprehensive approach, then it's perfectly fine. What do you think of raw A2 dairy if you have an autoimmune Hashimoto hypothyroidism? I think if you have an autoimmune disease, you need to really reconsider dairy until your antibodies are normalized. Dairy has the propensity to look like gluten. Casein, which is one of the proteins found in dairy, looks very similar. It has homology with gluten. And so most people with Hashimoto's are gluten sensitive. And so if you continue to eat dairy, it's very possible that that dairy creates a molecular mimicry response, making your immune system continue to react and continue to create antibodies against your, you know, the processes of thyroid hormone production. So it's not something I recommend. Now, there are some people, you know, getting beyond autoimmunity, getting into kind of recovery phase where the antibodies are gone, that do okay, that can introduce A2 forms of dairy into their diet and see how they do. But before I would recommend anybody try to do that, always know first as well whether or not you're allergic or sensitive to dairy. And of course, there are tests that can help you understand that. The other thing to understand, so there's allergy, there's sensitivity to dairy, and it doesn't matter whether it's A2 or not. You can still be allergic to A2 dairy. You can still be sensitive to A2 dairy, but you can also be lactose intolerant. And I think at last estimation, it was somewhere in the neighborhood, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like 40 to 60% of people with gluten sensitivity celiac diagnosis are lactose intolerant. And it's because the damage from gluten to the intestine, it damages the brush border of the intestine, reducing a person's ability to produce the enzymes that break down the sugar in dairy. That sugar is called lactose. So there's an enzyme that helps break that down called lactase. And if you're gluten sensitive, you may have the damage to your brush border where you're not making enough of that enzyme so that you are intolerant to dairy. So think of it, in all of those different ways. And then if you aren't intolerant and you're not sensitive and you're not allergic and your antibodies are normalized and you're no longer with active Hashimoto's and you want to try to introduce A2 types of dairy, go for it. But also be aware and be cautious and pay attention to how your body communicates to you if you make that attempt. What's the best supplement for liver cirrhosis? I mean, I'd say get with a doctor and understand why your liver cirrhosis is happening, because it's not going to be a supplement that's going to cure a liver cirrhosis. I mean, you can take certain things that will support the liver and it will help the liver process. And so, there's a variety of things there, Osama. One would be milk thistle, standardized to contain at least 90% silymarin, which is the active ingredient of milk thistle. But you could also use alpha lipoic acid and N-acetylcysteine and glutathione. Actually, go back up. There's, I think, one I missed there. Those are all great things, but figure out why it is your liver is so damaged. Especially if you don't drink alcohol. So if you have non-alcoholic fatty liver cirrhosis, I've seen gluten cause liver cirrhosis, among other food allergies. So you really need to get an understanding of why your liver is being damaged. And you can use supplements as support, but if you're trying to cure cirrhosis and you don't know what caused it using supplements, you're not going to have good luck. The problem is going to persist. What can you tell us about acrylamide? I can tell you it's not a good thing. Acrylamide is basically, it's a byproduct of superheating carbohydrate-based foods. So, where we can really get a lot of acrylamide formation is in the frying of carbohydrates. So like French fries, onion rings, things of that nature. Anything that you put in a deep fryer that's a carbohydrate-based food is going to form acrylamide as a byproduct. Anything you put in an air fryer, so it's not just deep frying in oil, but it's also superheating in an air fryer or in any other method of cooking. When you hypercook carbohydrates, you form more acrylamide. Acrylamide is a carcinogen. It's a recognized carcinogen. So less is more. It's not to say you can't cook some of those foods periodically, but if you're using those things as staples in your diet, you're asking for a problem. Does propofol anesthesia contain any gluten derivatives? It depends. You have to look at the brand. So, when it comes to, get with the anesthesiologist who wants to use it, or the doctor that wants to use it, or the pharmacist, and ask them for the inactive ingredient list, because it's the inactive ingredient list that's going to tell you whether or not there's a filler that might be gluten-based. The drug itself doesn't contain gluten, but it's the fillers that you have to worry about, and that's where you need that inactive ingredient list. Can taking too much vitamin C cause stomach ulcer type sensations? No, taking too much vitamin C when you already have damage to your stomach can irritate an already damaged lining, and it can feel bad. But vitamin C in and of itself won't cause that. It will only exacerbate a pre-existing damage, because vitamin C, depending on what kind of vitamin C you're taking, especially if it's like an ascorbic acid and it's a non-buffered version, Christine. So that's why if you ever use our vitamin C, it's called Detox C. It's buffered. It has multiple minerals buffering it so that kind of thing can't happen, because there are people that do have pre-existing stomach lesions or ulcers, and taking things like vitamin C without having it buffered can cause an exacerbation of that sensation, just like eating, acidic foods might cause an exacerbation. Laura is asking, my daughter and I both tested positive for gluten sensitivity and are grain-free. We are now both on the low end weight height ratio. Suggestions for adding weight? Yeah, I mean, the best thing you can do is track what you're currently eating, Laura. And, you can do some simple calculations. So one of the things that you can do is you take your age, your height, your weight, your gender. You can plug that into what's called a BMR calculator. If you just do a Google search for BMR calculator. BMR stands for Basic Metabolic Rate. BMR, Basic Metabolic Rate. And if you plug in your detailed information in one of these calculators, it will tell you approximately how many calories a day you should be consuming as a total quantity to maintain your current weight. So if you're looking to gain weight, you have to go above that number. And this calculator will also give you estimations for exercise. So if you're also exercising, of course, exercise expends more calories. So you really ideally want to know what your basic caloric need is with the current level of exercise that you have. And if you're trying to gain weight, you want to go above that BMR caloric rate. And if you're not getting above that, you're going to really, really struggle. I see this all the time in people who are new going gluten-free, mainly because they're trying to find other foods, but in that transition period of being new to the diet, they're like, what do I eat? And so they're just overall, they're just not eating enough total calories. It's one of the most common reasons we'll see kind of a persistent weight loss that doesn't plateau and stabilize out. So start with your BMR, start with the understanding of you need to know how many calories your body needs on a day-to-day basis just to maintain its current weight, and then understand that 3,500 calories is equivalent to 1 pound. So if you're eating, for example, if your BMR is, let's just say let's do easy math. Let's say your BMR is 1,000 calories. You need at least 1,000 calories a day to maintain your current weight. And if you're trying to gain weight, there's 3,500 calories in 1 pound. So then there's 7 days in a week. So you would want to increase your caloric intake by 500 calories a day. So go from 1,000 to 1,500. But if you do that over 7 days, we can predictably say you should gain 1 pound in that time frame. So again, you're not trying to gain a pound a day, but a pound a week is a pretty decent estimation of what's possible. Some people don't want to do it that quickly, want to do it a little bit slower. So again, you just use those numbers as a first starting point. Now, metabolism is not a perfect science because we're not all airtight boxes, which is how calories were originally calculated. Was we would take food and we put it in an airtight box and we'd light it on fire, we burn it, and we'd measure the heat that produced, and that's what we call calories, right? It's the heat generated when you burn food in an airtight box is calorie. And so we try to apply that to humans, and humans aren't perfect airtight boxes, and then there's nuance from one person's metabolism to another. However, you got to start with some type of objective basis. So start with your basic metabolic rate. Good afternoon, Dr. O. Can I take more than 2 Alpha Max a day for elevated liver enzymes? You can take more than 2. It's safe to take more than 2. You can take 3 to 4 a day, and I probably wouldn't go much over that, though. I'm having heartburn, acid reflux, and belching every day, no matter what I eat or drink. My doctor just prescribed Pepcid. That does not always help. Any advice? You probably need to ask your doctor to test you for Helicobacter pylori, which is a bacterial infection in the stomach that can cause reflux, heartburn, no matter what you eat. And so that would be a good place to start. There are other microbes. You might ask him to do a culture and look for, again, H. pylori, but also look for other types of microbes as well. Yeast can sometimes be a culprit in that regard also. But that's where I would say you need to start. You could take supplements to try to support the lining of your GI tract, like something like GI Soothe or GI Shield. But at the end of the day, you want to know why that heartburn's happening. So any kind of supplementation is just going to be more of a kind of a green medicine in the sense that it may help soothe the gut, but it's going to solve why the gut isn't soothed all the time without it. On a gluten-free diet, I bake bread with almond flour. That is such a good idea. It's not really, Julia. It's not that it's not a bad idea. Again, go back to the premise of what I said earlier at the beginning of the show. Not everybody needs to worry about oxalate in the regard that all oxalates are bad, right? I mean, there are plenty of foods that have high oxalates that can be healthy for people. I think it goes back down to the shape or the health that the person's in, and the other variable factors as to what might contribute to them not being able to properly handle oxalates. So I think when you're looking at baking bread with almond flour, you don't have to necessarily say, I'm never going to do this again. I think really you just have to fundamentally ask the question, if your oxalates are high, is that the best thing for you to do? But if your oxalates are fine and your metabolism is fine and you're healing and you're feeling well, don't, I wouldn't so much worry about that aspect. What's the best supplement? Okay, I answered that one. Is there an optimum range in C-peptide lab results range? Not really. The reference range on those tests is pretty standard. What's the value of taking serrapeptase and nattokinase? They're proteolytic enzymes. The value would be that they can support healthy blood flow and blood viscosity. In Japan, they use nattokinase in many cases as a natural blood thinner because as a proteolytic enzyme, it helps with that viscosity of the blood. So there's a value there. What some doctors are recommending using these enzymes in people who have long COVID or who have been shot up as a means to help with that. But I don't think there's any really solid. There's anecdote, but there's not a lot of solid research that's shown that those things are definitive. When will CalMag and Biotic Defense be back in stock? You might just reach out to Glutenology support customer service. It's Malaya, Malaya, and you can reach her at glutenology@gmail.com. She can give you a more definitive answer than I can. What should I do, or what do I do if niacin makes me red and flush? That's normal, Robert. If you're taking niacin in the form of nicotinic acid, it will make you flush. It will make you red. One of the things that some people find helpful is eating a larger meal when they take their niacin to reduce or offset some of those symptoms. The other thing that some people like to do is take it at night before you go to sleep, and that way you sleep right through the flush. That's the way I take it when I take niacin. I take it before I go to bed. What do I do for my daughter who is at my house 50% of the time following no grain, no pain? And when with her mom, they don't follow the diet, how do I stay consistent? It's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your daughter. You love her. I'm sure her mom loves her too. The way I would probably try to handle it is have a sit down conversation, and get the other parent involved into the why, why that's a necessity and why that needs to happen. And start there by being just civil and trying to co-parent. Beyond that, some parents, are going to be adamant, hard nose, right? You may sit down and have that conversation like, well, I don't believe in this gluten-free diet thing. This is where you'd have to determine what the medical need is with your daughter. I mean, if there's something that she's medically being hurt as a result of gluten consumption, you'd want to track that. You'd want to log that. And then you'd want to, again, have that conversation, approach that conversation with your ex-spouse. And, hopefully, she'll see eye to eye with you as you're tracking the health implications of not being gluten-free, because beyond that, it just can get very ugly. I mean, you're talking about getting attorneys involved and going into a judge's chamber and having the judge, throwing it in front of the judge to see what he's going to say. But to do something like that, you spend a ton of money in attorney's fees and expert fees and everything else. So I always start with a civil conversation, and hopefully co-parenting will help get everyone on the same page. The other thing you do is just educate your daughter, depending on her age. A lot of times kids, if they understand the why, they'll make better decisions. They may not be perfect. They may not make perfect decisions, but, if she's making a better decision, more of the time as opposed to not, it's a step in the right direction as well. My friend offered me some organic beans. I told her no. Are they high in carbs and cause blood sugar spikes? It depends. I mean, they are high in carbs, but will they cause a blood sugar spike? It depends on the person. For some people, yes, and for some people, no. Is it recommended for someone with a mild garlic sensitivity to avoid supplements that contain garlic, even if it's only a minor ingredient? Yes, it is recommended. How should one balance the severity of their garlic sensitivity against the potential benefits of the supplement? Don't take garlic if you're sensitive to it. That's how you balance it. It's that simple. It's very black and white. You've got a lot of other options beyond garlic as supplements for benefits for a number of different things without having to poison yourself simultaneously. If I go low oxalate, do I need to lower my vitamin C supplement? Maybe and maybe not. Only if so. Vitamin C can. There is a metabolic pathway where vitamin C can be converted into oxalate, but it's not a preferred pathway for vitamin C. So I've only ever seen people experience vitamin C to oxalate problems. It's a rarer thing in my experience. That being said, it's important to pay attention. If you're needing to go low oxalate, it's better to not megadose vitamin C, at least for a time, and see that your oxalate levels are actually coming down. And then you can, at a later point, reintroduce vitamin C if you prefer. If some people take vitamin C during cold and flu season at higher doses, etc., and there is a benefit. But again, it's a case-by-case, kind of more of a unique basis than it is a one-size-fits-all answer. I have a lot of people that do very well with vitamin C. It's actually quite helpful for them, but they also have an oxalate issue, and it does not exacerbate their oxalate issue. And then again, there are sometimes people that have oxalate issues where vitamin C supplementation is not helpful for them. Terry, I can't answer your question because the misspell is ursolic acid supplement. I don't know if that's a misspell or what, but maybe you could retype that question and elaborate for me. Shauna says, can I ask, I was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, last year, and I've tried with vitamin D3 at 10,000 units, with vitamin K2, but my vitamin D is still under 50. Well, man, if it's still under 50 and you're at 10,000, the first thought would be you're taking a supplement possibly that isn't high quality, or it's possible that it's just not enough for you. But for most people, 10,000 units a day of a good emulsified type of vitamin D is ample and adequate to push that level well up over 50. I mean, there are scenarios where you need more, and you may be one of those scenarios. But consider the supplement that you're taking as well. If you're buying something, for example, some type of generic stuff at CVS or some drugstore, a lot of those products are not, when we put them under scrutiny and we really measure them and test them, they're not all forthright with their labeling. So you have to be careful about that in the supplement industry. Can we increase our gut health to the point of being able to eat oxalate? Yeah, of course. I eat oxalate. I don't not eat oxalate. But I also don't eat, a spinach smoothie blended with celery and almond milk and everything else every day. I think where a lot of people trend toward hurting themselves is with these juicing trends, where you're basically juicing every green that is mega oxalate, and then you're using almond milk to mix it, and you're doing that once or twice a day. I don't care who you are, that's not healthy. That's not going to be good for you in the long run. I think there's a reasonable quantity that most people are capable of tolerating. It's when we go overboard with the so-called superfood smoothies and everything else that we really see people struggle more with oxalate. There are other variances there too. As I mentioned earlier, yeast overgrowth or pre-existing yeast overgrowth will create oxalate. Yeast produce oxalate inside of you, right? So that's not dietary exposure, but that's internal biochemical production. And then again, there's environmental mold that can drive it up as well. And then there's things like vitamin B6 deficiency. You need vitamin B6, and vitamin B1 has been shown to lower oxalate levels as well. So, I mean, there are scenarios where people are B1 or B6 deficient and don't know it. So there's all kind of nuance to oxalate. So going back to, it's not just everybody needs to go low oxalate for the rest of their life, but everyone's different in that regard. And sometimes it takes some investigation and intelligence to determine, you know, where a person should go more effectively with their diet. Is there a recommended way to make sure that when you're buying organic or grass-fed beef, it's actually what you get? Knowing who you're buying it from is a great way to start. You know, having a relationship with the people that provide your food, you know, if you really, you know, that way you can build trust and confidence in the product that you're getting. When you buy from a major chain store, you know, you may not know what their source is. Is their source honest? Is their source a liar? It's hard to say. There's got to be some level of trust in our food chain. That's getting harder and harder to come by, which is why I recommend, as a general rule of thumb, that you get to know your farmers, get to know the people that are making your food, you know, develop relationships with them, join a local food co-op, support your local markets, because that's where you're going to be able to forge relationships and get honest answers without having to always suspect or distrust, you know, the bigger stores. What are the symptoms of having problems with oxalates? There's a ton of them, Nina. We've got a link up below. I don't know if we put that link on Facebook. We did. Okay, so it's a crash course on oxalate, and there's a whole list, a battery of symptoms listed out for you. Some of the more common ones that I have seen in people are joint pain. Oxalates will store into joint tissue. So beyond kidney stones, joint pain. Oftentimes women will develop vulvodynia, which is a pain in their female parts. And then we'll also see with high oxalates, sometimes we'll see heart palpitations. I've seen many, many cases of people really struggle with heart palpitations and not know why they had them. And part of the reason why that was happening was oxalate. But there's a huge array of different symptoms that can develop as a result of oxalate. So there's a new study just published a few weeks ago on oxalate crystal deposition in the brains of patients with Parkinson's disease. And so there's now some suspicion that oxalates even play a role in Parkinson's, or can. So at any rate, that should give you some places to start looking. Does food separation, such as eating 2 fruit between meals, impact the absorption of oxalate? Not generally speaking. Can we eat tallow? You can cook with tallow, sure. A lot of our cultural traditions were to store food in winter months in tallow, right? Because it's a great preservative. That saturated fat blocks out light and oxygen and can preserve a food. So a lot of cultures, even still yet today, use tallow as a preservative agent. But certainly you can eat it. I would say, you know, there are some people that say eat as much as you want. I also, though, would be cautious, because there's a limit to the quantity of saturated animal fat that people can eat. And so you don't just want to eat it with reckless abandon either. I'm celiac, Hashimoto's, pancreatic insufficiency, hair loss, among others. I've lost a lot of muscle. Can ultra pure protein help with muscle recovery? And if it replaces a meal, or is it complementary? Great question, Ara. It can definitely help support your muscle recovery, but at the end of the day, you know, if you're trying to recover muscle, you really got to know how much protein you're getting in the course of your day. And so where ultra pure protein can be helpful is this 27 grams of protein, pure protein per serving. But you really need to make sure you're hitting adequate protein over the course of your entire day to give your body the resource to rebuild that muscle. And so people that are trying to rebuild muscle generally need to be somewhere around 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So that's, you know, you've got to make sure you're hitting those goals too. So, and if ultra pure protein is helping you hit that goal, more power to use it. I believe I'm completely grain-free. Is it normal to have a distended abdomen after eating? I feel good. My thyroid has improved. My vision has improved. Good sleep and energy. It depends the extent. Are you having just like a little bit of abdominal distension, or are you having, the classic beer belly, Laurie? It's hard to say because, there's everything from mild, which you can have some mild distension because when you put food in your mouth and it goes in, it's space occupying, right? So it's going to create some distension on the abdomen to a certain extent, but it shouldn't be excessive or aggressive. Is there a test for gluten intolerance? Yeah, there is. Jackie, put a link up for Jackie for genetic testing on gluten sensitivity predisposition. I'm concerned about oxalates. Thoughts on the carnivore diet? I think carnivore diet is very helpful in people that have some oxalate toxicity, but I think carnivore diet by itself over a long period of time is not a very well tested out diet. And so I think what we're going to see, similar to what we've seen with keto and some other long-term restriction diets, is that there are potential nutritional risks that come with those diets. What I have seen with a lot of carnivore diets is I just had, actually this morning I was in a review and I had a client's lab results come back. It was probably the most malnourished result I've ever seen. And that's saying something because I've probably run more than 50,000 micronutrient tests over the last couple of decades, and which is arguably more than any doctor living today. And this was one of the worst I'd ever seen. And this woman's been on a carnivore diet for about 3 years. So there are definitely nutritional risks that we want to be aware of. Some people feel better on a carnivore diet and they're listening to their body. So I don't want to discourage kind of that body talk that you might have with yourself. But just understand, if you're going to go on any kind of restrictive diet, you need to make sure you're checking your micronutrient status periodically so you don't head into a storm of malnutrition down the road. Certainly a carnivore diet is going to be low to no oxalate. But I would say if you're going to do carnivore diet, you need to justify it. And if you haven't really justified it and you just have kind of a small concern about oxalates, then, validate that concern with some testing and validate that concern with intelligent guidance, but don't just jump on a trendy bandwagon and blindly follow things that may not be the right fit for you as a unique person. What's the best vegan or algae omega-3 that you would recommend? I don't, because they don't work. Gaia, we have seen this time and time again with vegans who refuse to use fish. And I do extensive testing on omegas. We do what's called red blood cell omega percentages. So we look at concentration of omega-3 in people's red blood cells as a standard of care of what we do in our practice. But then we also look at intracellular omega-3 levels as well, including EPA and DHA and things like oleic acid, but oleic acid's omega-9. But omega-3 vegan supplements are junk. They don't work. They will never get your omega-3 levels above 2 or 3%, what should it be? If you're looking at red blood cell membrane levels, it should be a minimum 8%. So 8 to 12% is a good range for omega-3 in the membrane of the red blood cell. And I have seen vegans try for years to use these products to get their omega-3 levels up, and they just can't. They can never really get them over 3%. You've got it. If you're going to get omega-3, so understand that vegan products are not omega-3. They're pre-omega-3. They're linolenic acid that then has to be converted through several different enzymatic conversions to get to EPA and DHA. And this is one of the hallmark problems of a pure vegan-based diet, is that humans are not really good at that conversion in mass. And so it's very challenging for a person to get adequate omega-3 from vegan-based, plant-based supplements that contain linolenic acid versus containing EPA and DHA. If you're sensitive to sardine and anchovy, there are plenty of products on the market that are derived from other than sardine and anchovy. There are some fish oils that contain, salmon, cod liver oil would be an option for you possibly, as well as mackerel and tuna, and then eating the food, right? We can also always eat the food. I don't know if you're following a vegan-based diet, but again, it's one of the drawbacks and that I have seen clinically. And this is not an affront to any of you that are wanting to be vegan or plant-based. It's not no judgment, but this is just my experience and what I've seen. And I've never seen a vegan be able to get adequate omega-3 levels by using a vegetarian omega-3 based product. Do you have a suggestion for optimal K2 type with vitamin D to support strong bones? I think a nice blend of K2, K4, K7 is fine. I think food-based ways are probably even better than supplemental ways, because food, there's the unknown with food. Food is brilliantly intelligent. It's gifted by God's grace, and so supplements can sometimes be lacking things that we don't quite understand. And in that regard, getting good fermented foods like kimchi or cabbage, sauerkraut, which is going to be rich in vitamin K2 in all varieties, is also a good idea to incorporate those things in your diet. I have extreme twitching in my legs. Neurologist tests show nothing. I take calcium, magnesium, potassium. Any ideas? Get deeper testing done, Cheryl. If it's extreme, you've got a problem. And it may be nutritional, and it may not be calcium, potassium, or magnesium. It may be something else. It may be neurologically related to B vitamin deficits or other things. You certainly could try B vitamin or like a B complex, but I would get tested, because testing is going to give you a more definitive answer. And if that problem is serious, you don't want to wait around until it becomes more serious. Could I use beets in moderation, or should it be eliminated altogether? In the context of oxalates, I would say you can eat beets in moderation if you don't have an oxalate problem. Again, take it as per the context of who you are, and not necessarily that everybody needs to be oxalate free. I love this. So Dr. Osborne, I followed your advice on tart, cherries, and juice and supplementation, and my gout is almost over. Thanks for this dearly. You're welcome. I'm glad it was super helpful for you. If a person knows where there is malnutrition and having lots of issues, what test is the best to see what my malnutrition issues are? Can we put for Jacques? Can we put a micronutrient link up for him? I'm on a water-only fast. When I start eating food again, I want to enter one food at a time to see if I'm sensitive to that food. How long do I stay on that one food before adding another food? I don't recommend. Oh, okay. Let me rephrase that. A day, Donna, a day to 2 days potentially, but honestly, the real answer is 3 weeks. But I don't recommend that, because you'll be malnourished if you take that kind of approach. You'll start becoming severely malnourished. This is the problem with trying to test sensitivities on an elimination diet, is that the window of delayed hypersensitivity response is 3 hours to 3 weeks. So if you're really trying to introduce one food at a time to see whether you become symptomatic, you really, because it's a 3-week window, it's a really hard thing to do. Now, what an elimination diet is really, really good at is identifying any kind of acute or subacute reactions, and that window is a day, right? So in that regard, you'll find those shorter reaction time foods that you might react to, but you're not going to find those longer ones. And that's where a lot of people struggle. So again, I'm not discouraging you from doing it. You may find some valuable data within waiting a day in between reintroduction of another food, but you're not going to find those delayed hypersensitivity responses. I have progressive neuropathy and extreme weakness. I can barely walk in the last 3 weeks. The physiatrist said it was aging. It's not aging. Progressive neuropathy is not aging. Aging does not cause progressive neuropathy. No, it's not just aging. too fast. I don't eat any gluten. Any suggestions? Quit messing around. Get a good functional doc. Get the right testing. Because if you're talking about progressive neuropathy, you don't want to end up in a wheelchair. Nerve damage is hard. It's already, first of all, it's very slow to heal because nerves are just slower to heal than other tissue. And if you let it progress far enough, some of that stuff can become really, really a bear to reverse. And in some cases, you don't get full function back. So don't mess around with it. Get it tested. Which of your, I'm not sure I understand this, which of your products are best to increase microbiome diversity? The best way to increase microbiome diversity is to eat seasonally, to eat fresh food locally grown, and to go outside and be exposed to dirt and air and light and all things earthy. As far as supplements to support your microbiome, we have probably our strongest, most high power one is called Ultrabiotic Defense. And it's just a very high dose of Bifidobacter species and Lactobacillus species. We have several varieties of probiotic, but that's the one that, if somebody's been on antibiotics and coming off of antibiotics, that's the one we recommend that you take to support your microbiome's healthy recovery. I worry about mercury in fish. Doesn't tuna in the bigger fish have lots of mercury and possibly cadmium? Can, but a lot of things that you're exposed to today can be problematic. If you're worried about mercury in fish, there's some companies that do sell fish where they have higher testing restrictions on allowable mercury in their fish. And so you might check out some of those companies, Vital Choice being one of them. You might also choose smaller fish, right? So you're right about the bigger the fish, the more the potential for accumulation of mercury in the flesh of that fish. But so you could go for smaller options. Anchovy sardines are smaller option fish as opposed to tuna. Can you go up just a little bit on that? I heard that there's bacteria that can cause trigeminal neuralgia. There's a lot of bacteria. An infection or an overgrowth can cause neuralgias or neural inflammation, not just trigeminally in the trigeminal nerve, but in other places as well. And so the best way to go about it is not assume it's bacteria, is to get yourself cultured and tested so that you can understand whether or not there is a bacterial issue, because trigeminal neuralgia can also be induced as a result of neural or a virus as well. There's certain viral infection that can contribute to the neuralgia like that. And then there's B vitamin deficiencies that can contribute to it. I've seen cases of gluten-induced trigeminal neuralgia. So don't assume that it's just bacteria. Again, if you're trying to figure out the root cause, you want to get the appropriate testing so that you can. So if you had a dent, and then there's that too, there's a dental procedure. So if the dentist injured your nerve, if he injected, or drilled too far, those are possibilities. And sometimes those things recover, and it just takes time, and you can do certain things to support that recovery, like red light therapies and extra nutrition. But again, it's hard to speculate, Deborah. Let's see, Kevin's asking, in my experience, how can you tell if oxalates are an issue for an individual? The biggest thing to do is test. I know there's flaws in testing, but to me, testing is still an objective way to find it. And I find high oxalates on a relatively frequent basis in people. And so testing can be very valuable in that regard. So I'd start there. The second aspect would be to have somebody go low oxalate for a time to determine whether or not they had any kind of symptomatic improvement. So like doing like a low oxalate course over the period of, a 1 to 2 month period of time, and then follow up, but that's more of a subjective way to go about it. Is it correct that if you do the gluten diet, haven't been confirmed gluten sensitive, you will never eat any of the forbidden foods again? Are there different levels of sensitivity? No, Brenda, gluten sensitivity is a lot like pregnancy. You either are or you're not. If we're talking about just pure gluten sensitivity and not other things like glyphosate or mycotoxins that are sometimes found in grain and can be problematic and sometimes are misconstrued as gluten. But, if you're gluten sensitive, you're gluten sensitive. Not a little bit, you just are. Any insight to share on vertigo? Had it off and on for decades, unable to find the root cause. A lot of insight into vertigo. It's, oftentimes vertigo is neurological. And I don't know if you're on a gluten-free diet at this point, but gluten is a major contributing factor in damaging the vestibulocochlear nerve of the inner ear that can lead to vertigo. You might also have a physical problem where the crystals in your otolith crystals in your semicircular canals in your inner ear are precipitating out and lodging and creating fluid flow problems leading to vertigo. So there's something called an Apley's maneuver, or an Epley's maneuver rather, not Epley, that you can ask your doctor to perform on you that may dislodge some of those crystals and help as a resolution if you haven't already gone that route of investigation. I like spinach in season, also asparagus. How high are these in oxalates, and is there a difference between cooked or raw spinach? I think cooking the spinach actually increases the presence of oxalates available for you to absorb. Cooking the spinach doesn't change how much oxalate is there. I think it more, like I said, more than anything, it just frees up oxalate's capacity to be absorbed, where when you eat it raw, there's a lot more oxalate bound to the leaf itself, and so your body's not fully capable of absorbing all of that. So cooking and juicing can actually free up more oxalate for absorption. So, like that question has come up a lot in the feed today. How does cooking impact it? Cooking and juicing and pulverizing food increases the potential oxalate absorbability from the food that you're eating. Do I feel like IgG tests are accurate? No. Most IgG tests are very inaccurate, and you're going to get a lot of false positive on those types of tests because there's different kinds of immunoglobulin G antibodies, and some are protective. And a lot of these IgG tests that are being sold online, as a matter of fact, most of them do not differentiate between protective antibodies and actual harmful antibodies, Melissa. It's part of why we offer food sensitivity testing, because our testing does differentiate, but it doesn't just stop at IgG. It also measures IgA, IgM, immune complex, and T cell response as well. So it's just an overall more accurate assessment of food immunoreactivity. I can put a link to that testing if you'd like to read more about it. I love this comment. Michelle says, if you have Hashimoto's, watch Dr. Osborne's video on gluten. I no longer have Hashimoto's as long as I stay away from gluten. Thank you, Dr. Osborne. You're welcome, Michelle. Thanks for sharing. What supplements are best taken apart from others because they compete for uptake and absorption? That question is too vast. You got to give me specifics of what you're using, and I can give you more of an answer, but there's so much potential there to talk about. Can taking a probiotic with Oxalobacter replace the body's ability to process oxalates again or improve its ability? Nobody knows, because the studies on Oxalobacter, the research studies, speculated some improvement, but nobody has been able to produce an Oxalobacter commercially. So I don't have enough data to make a great commentary on that. And in my opinion, there's not enough research to claim that Oxalobacter supplementation would be tremendously advantageous for people with oxalate problems, although it's sound theory and some preliminary research says it could be. That being said, you can't buy it over the counter, but what you can do is you can develop a robust microbiome by eating seasonally, by going outside, by getting your hands in the dirt, gardening, doing things like eating fermented foods, so that you can ensure a really robust and diverse microbiome development. You know, a lot of people, the reason they have poor microbiome development or a lack of diversity in their guts is because they eat the same foods all the time year round. They eat highly processed foods. They're being exposed to antibiotics. Many of the foods that you're eating contain things that act as antibiotics, like pesticides. You're drinking chlorinated water, which also acts like an antibiotic. So there's all these things in our environment that can contribute to a decimation of the diversity of healthy flora. And we know this because some really great researchers have been going and looking at cultures that don't have all this processing and don't have all this germ theory fear in their societies. And what they find when they measure these individuals' microbiomes is they're very extremely diverse and rich, including Oxalobacter species. So the best way, you know, to do this is to treat your body well and try to avoid things that are direct poisons. Are beef tablets, you talking about beef liver tablets? No, beef liver tablets are not higher in iron than controlled iron supplements with specified dose, Maddie. That's not to say that you can't use beef liver in a tablet form to try to support more iron in your diet. But it's most of them are not standardized to contain a specific quantity of iron versus an iron supplement that is. And so if you're trying to correct an anemia that's transient as a result of menstrual cycles, you really, ideally, you want to use an iron supplement where you can predict what the dose you're taking is and the outcomes. Okay, and there's just so many more questions and we're out of time. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. If you asked a question, I didn't answer it. It's not, I wasn't trying to ignore you. We just only have so much time in these sessions. Look, I would encourage you to come back next Thursday. We do this live Q&A. If you're new to the show, we do it live every Thursday at 12:30 Central Standard Time. That's PM. And bring your nutrition questions. And I'll do my best to get as many answered as I can within the allotted time frame. And I appreciate you being here, and I hope you learned something today. And as always, you know, consider supporting our mission. We're here to save 100 million lives. I need your help to do that. How do I need your help? How can you help? You can share this video. You can like this video. You can copy the URL of this video and send it to a friend or a family member who's in need. You know, the more we can help together, the more lives we can save. The other ways you can support us is visit us at Gluten-Free Society, glutenfreesociety.org, and you can check out all of our great and wonderful free information on that platform as well. Sign up for our newsletter to reduce the potential that we're ever censored from your inbox. It's the only way we can do that. And then consider using our products. If you're in the market for good, high-quality, gluten, grain-free nutritional supplements, then check us out at Gluten-Free Society. If you're looking for labs on micronutrient testing and gluten sensitivity testing and food sensitivity testing, you can also use our testing services at Gluten-Free Society. And again, we appreciate you. We appreciate any support you can provide, whether you're buying our products or whether you're just coming here and sharing. We love you all. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next Tuesday for a live crash course, and then again next Thursday at 12:30 for a live Q&A. Take care.